talking about phase shift. Now, all that phase shift means is we're going to take our trig functions, the graphs of them, and we're going to shift them over left or right. So if we shift, oops, let's change colors here. If we shift this sine graph over to the right, it might look like that. So it's not going to change the shape, the size of it at all. We're just moving it to the left and the right. Likewise, we can take this tangent function and shift it over to the left, and it will look like that. So if your phase shift is positive, it's shifting to the right. If it's negative, it shifts to the left. So we're just going to add a little bit onto our equations here. So notice we have this minus, and this symbol is phi. So those of you who like to write this down, that's phi. It just represents part of our phase shift in our equations. So the first two we're pretty familiar with. The amplitude and period are the same as we looked at it from previous lessons. So the amplitude is just going to be the absolute value of our A, whatever numbers multiplied with our sines, cosines, tangents, etc. Our period is going to be 2 pi over w for sines, cosines, secants, and cosecants. Omega is the number next to the x that's being multiplied in the parentheses. And then our phase shift, which is new, is going to be our phi divided by our omega. Now, one thing to note here is that the base function has a minus sign inside of the parentheses. So kind of like when we're talking about the functions in algebra, the transformations, the inside of the parentheses moves it left and right. It follows the same rules. So if it's a minus 3, for example, then we're moving right 3. If it were a plus, however, we'd be actually moving it the opposite direction. We'd be moving it to the left. So it's kind of counterintuitive, because you think that because we have a minus, we're going to go to the negative side. And if we have a plus, we go to the positive side. They're flip-flopped in that regard. All right, so let's just get into these examples. We're just going to be finding the amplitude, period, and phase shift for each of these functions here. So in the first one, the amplitude is going to be the absolute value of A. Our A is 3. The absolute value of 3 is 3. The period here, we're going to do our omega. 2 pi divided by our omega is 2. So our period is 2 divided by 2, which is 1 pi. And then we're just adding in this phase shift, right? So phase shift is going to be our phi over omega. Remember again, the form is negative or a minus sign there. So we're just taking our pi for our phi. So you have pi divided by our omega is 2. Right, so all this means is that whatever our sine graph started off looking like, it shifted, the phase shift shifted it over pi over 2 radians. So it starts someplace like that. And that's all that phase shift means. For the second one, pretty much the same thing. The reason why I chose this one was because we have the plus here. So let's go ahead and do the amplitude. The amplitude is the absolute value of our 2, which is 2. Our period is going to be 2 pi over our omega, which is 4. So when we reduce 2 and 4, we get pi over 2. And then for our phase shift, we're going to do this time, though, remember, if it helps you, you can change this plus to minus negative to get into the proper form. minus negative 3 pi. And that way we know that our phi is negative 3 pi. The other way to go about doing it, if you can remember, is just the opposite sign of whatever's inside of the parentheses. So the opposite of a plus would be a negative. Okay, over our phi again. And then we're done. I mean, over our omega, sorry, I said phi, when 4 is our omega. Alright, and that's pretty much it. That represents a phase shift to the left of negative 3 pi over 4 radians. So if your normal cosine looks like this, you shift it over to the left wherever negative 3 pi over 4 is, and we'd start there, and then we'd make our graph, if we had to graph it. I'm not asking you to graph it, just understand the concept of a phase shift means that we're shifting it left and right. Alright, so that's it. Good job today. Please make sure you take down your notes, write down any questions you have, and we can talk about them next class.